This is Bobbi Newman. I'd like to welcome you to this week's Research Minutes, the CPRE Knowledge Hub's weekly podcast where we interview researchers about the latest work being done in the field to help improve education. This week I speak with Thomas Alsbury, Professor of Educational Leadership at Northwest University, about his research on school boards. Tom, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
You've extensively studied school board and superintendent relationships. Can you explain what you found?
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting journey over the past nearly 20 years now. I can tell you that when we started the research back in from the very beginning, one of the beliefs was that school boards didn't have any real effect or influence on the school districts that they served in. It was understood that they were a mouthpiece for the community and a liaison for public relations for the school district. But in terms of any kind of positive or negative effect, real effect on the students, the performance of the students or the performance of the district at large, it was generally believed that they didn't have much impact on that. And what we've learned over the course of our research is that in fact is not the case. Is that in fact school boards and what they believe, what they value, how they function, even within their meetings, and then of course the policy decisions that they make. But we found more importantly the culture that they set within and outside the boardroom have a dramatic impact. I think surprising a lot of folks how important an impact they have, both positively or negatively on the districts that they govern.
Why are school boards so important to America's public schools?
As most people know, the United States has been known, since our beginnings of our school system to use local elected boards. So we've been a very decentralized governance system, whereas many other places in the world have not been. They've used a centralized system. And then we've gone through this history on this pendulum of which should we practice, of central control or local control. And we've seen examples of that in our own country and kind of an ebb and flow of where should we be. This has been a big question mark on which is better, what works the best today. And so that's a pretty important effect that school board members have. In fact, Yannicone and Lutz, who studied school boards a long time ago, they wrote one of the very first theories on school boards in 1959 called the dissatisfaction theory of American democracy. And in a quote that they give, they say, in fact, that the local school board is the crucible of democracy in the United States today. That's a pretty powerful statement.
There seems to be a shift back to local control in some major cities like Philadelphia and Newark, New Jersey. From your research, can you identify why this trend is occurring?
We've seen about 20 years ago where we had 40 different urban districts that had gone away from local elected boards. They had appointed boards or mayors control the schooling systems. And at that time, there was the belief that this would produce great results, that it would be a much of an improvement over elected boards. And elected boards were kind of maligned at that time as being kind of ineffective. It is interesting that over those years, that 15 or 20 years, we actually have not increased that trend. It's actually decreased. So today, there's about 7 urban areas that now use mayoral-controlled boards. So we've actually moved back toward more elected boards. And so it seems from that trend that what you're suggesting is correct, that yes, people want a locally elected board. And there's a number of reasons for that. I would say the primary reason that we see in our work is the ability for people to have accessibility to their board and their board members to feel like they have a voice, whether they get their way or not. They just want a voice, and they want that accessibility. And then the ability to directly vote on those board members that would serve on that board.
Can you describe the balanced governance approach theory and its importance for local school boards?
The interesting thing about this concept is that it emerges from the data that we collected. We found that there was a difference between the standards, I'll use that term, that boards follow, as well as the way they conducted themselves in their meetings. And then a third area that I call individual characteristics. That is how individual board members kind of carried themselves within the office. And so what was interesting to this study was that over and over again, when asked the question of where do the most effective boards live or function in their operations, it was always in what I eventually called a balanced arena. One example would be the role between the school board and the superintendent. And so we have, if you can think of a continuum, we have everything from the extreme board member who is, I call them, a disengaged. It's also been called a rubber stamp board, where they hire a superintendent and then they get out of the way. And they sort of take on the idea that we don't know anything, we don't know what we're doing really, and so we're just going to hire somebody to run the district and then we're staying out of it. On the other end of the continuum, it could be called a micromanaging board or an overreaching board, where they're wanting to drive down to the school and tell teachers how to teach and principals how to lead, and they want to run the system themselves. What we discovered is that consistently boards that were creating cultures that promoted positive student performance function at neither end of the continuum. They function in a more balanced arena in what I eventually called informed oversight. So they did, and it's been traditionally taught to boards that you shouldn't micromanage, and so that's where you're to be an overseer or conduct oversight through policy, and so that's nothing new. But what I think is new is that we traditionally have been teaching boards that you really aren't educational experts, so you should stay out of things. You don't really need to understand the processes that are going on within the district or the programs that are being used in the district. You should just set some end outcome goals and just monitor those, sort of like a CEO board monitoring the stock prices. And that's what they've been taught to do. What we found is that boards that operate that way were not linked to higher performance, but it was a board that actually was informed, very informed, so that they could much more effectively first, not only make decisions on policies and programs more effectively, but could respond to their constituents in a much more politically satisfying way. And so this was, I think, a new approach to how boards should be trained and how they should operate again, through informed oversight.
After nearly 30 years of governing the Philadelphia School District, the School Reform Commission recently voted itself out of existence. What advice would you give to the future school board of Philadelphia?
We found a lot of trends or a lot of data that would give recommendations to the board. The first has to do with composition of the board. So the board should be balanced. Balanced in the sense of the ideology of the board. We find that boards that are balanced in terms of their occupations, for example, are the most effective boards. So boards that have majority educators on them were not found to be as effective, or boards with a majority business people on them were not found to be effective as boards that had a variety of folks on it. The second thing that I would do is recommend to them that they keep a laser-like focus on their strategic goals. And most districts are creating strategic plans now that are focused on student performance indicators, and that the board, again, stay focused on those things, on monitoring how they're doing in their strategic goals, and stay away from spending all of their time focusing in on the minutia of operations and management, which they really should stay out of. Now, it's interesting that as one of the things that I get the chance to do is to analyze boards and board meetings. And we find that most boards spend the majority of their time on operations and management. The most effective boards are spending about 70% of that board meeting time talking about that strategic goal. Again, notice that they're not telling the staff what to do or how to do it. They're simply asking really important questions so that they can be very informed and oversee to make sure that we're making progress on our strategic goals. And then the last thing is just in general is to maintain that balance. And so we talk about balanced governance. What's the role of the superintendent? What's the role of the board? Staying in that balanced arena of informed oversight. Don't micromanage, but don't become disengaged either from the process because that board member plays an important role. So that's a few pieces of advice I would give.
That's really sage advice for the future school board. Thanks, Tom, for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Research Minutes. To share your thoughts on this discussion, head to khub Conversations at cprehub.org. To subscribe to our weekly podcasts and listen to more interviews, head to soundcloud.com. And for the latest videos, podcasts, and discussion updates, follow us on Twitter at CPRE Hub and at CPRE Knowledge Hub on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.